Your car dies in the middle of nowhere. The wind hums across empty fields, and gravel crunches under unseen footsteps. Help arrives, but something feels off. A stranger knows your name, even though you've never met. Madison, Ethan, Tyler, and Lauren all found themselves stranded on deserted roads, greeted by people who offered a hand when it mattered most. Each encounter started with relief, but ended with a question that lingers long after the engine starts again. These are stories of kindness that cross the line between comfort and fear, where the living aren't always the ones who stop to help. Make sure you watch until the end. You won't believe what happens on County Road 14. Madison Carter tightened her grip on the steering wheel, looking out at County Road 14 as dusk crept over the fields. The car had died without warning. Dashboard flickered, then silence. She twisted the key again, but nothing. No cell signal. Only the wind across endless fields of corn and soybeans. The road a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt stretching toward the horizon. The sky pressed down, heavy and gray, and the only sounds were the wind and the faint chirp of crickets. She stepped out, the cool air and the smell of wood smoke settling around her, and popped the hood, even though she knew she wouldn't find anything she could fix. The engine bay looked like a maze of wires and hoses. She stared at it, hoping for a miracle, but the silence pressed in. Not a single car had passed in what felt like forever. The sun was almost gone, leaving long shadows crawling across the fields. She glanced at her phone again. Still nothing. Her nerves were tight, and she kept glancing down the road, half expecting headlights that never came. Then, from behind, she caught the faint glow of taillights through the dusk. A battered green pickup truck sat just off the shoulder, engine idling low. She hadn't heard it approach, but there it was. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his denim jacket faded and worn. He carried a red metal toolbox in one hand. "You need some help?" His voice was steady, calm, and carried easily in the stillness. He kept a few steps back, not crowding her, and the way he stood, just far enough away, put her a little more at ease. She hesitated, but there was nowhere else to turn. "It just stopped," she said, motioning toward the car. "I don't know what happened." He nodded, setting the toolbox on the ground. "Happens more often than you'd think out here." He spoke with a practiced calm, and when he opened the hood wider, his movements were careful and deliberate, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He didn't ask personal questions. The only sound was tool metal against engine steel as he checked connections and tightened bolts. His hands were rough and calloused, the kind that belonged to someone who'd spent years working with engines. Madison watched him work, the tension in her chest loosening a little. The way he moved was almost soothing, and for a few minutes, she let herself believe everything would be fine. But there was something odd about the way he seemed to know exactly where to look, as if he was familiar with the car's quirks. She tried to shake it off, focusing on the relief of having someone who knew what they were doing. After a few minutes, he stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. "Try it now," he said, nodding to the driver's seat. Madison climbed in and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared to life. She stared at the dashboard, stunned, then looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, climbing out again. "I don't even know how to repay you." He shook his head. "No need. Just pass it on, like I'd do for my daughter." His words were simple, but the way he said them made her pause. She nodded, the sense of unease returning for just a moment. Before she could ask anything else, he picked up his toolbox and started back toward his truck. The crunch of gravel under his boots faded as he disappeared into the growing darkness. Madison stood there, watching the taillights of the old pickup drift down the road until they vanished. She shook herself, got back in her car, and cranked up the heater. The warmth helped, and the familiar hum of the engine made her feel almost normal again. She checked her mirrors one last time before pulling away, the fields on either side swallowed in shadow. About half an hour later, she pulled into a gas station on the edge of a small Ohio town, the kind with a single row of pumps and a flickering fluorescent sign. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil. The clerk, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, stood behind the counter, sorting receipts. Madison tried to sound casual as she paid for gas. "Had some car trouble earlier," she said. "Lucky a guy stopped to help. Bill, I think he said his name was. Tall, quiet, had a red toolbox, knew exactly what he was doing." The woman's hands stilled. She looked up, studying Madison's face for a long moment. "Bill Harper?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," Madison said. "He said he'd do the same for his daughter. He had an old green truck." The clerk's expression changed, her eyes suddenly serious. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Honey, Bill Harper died 5 years ago. Car accident right on County Road 14. Folks around here say sometimes he still helps people who get stuck out there, always with that red toolbox and that old truck." Madison felt her stomach drop. She stared at the clerk, waiting for some sign this was a joke, but the woman just shook her head. "You're not the first, and you probably won't be the last." Madison walked back to her car in a daze. The night felt colder than before. She replayed the encounter in her mind, the way he'd appeared, the way he'd worked, the words he'd chosen. She hadn't imagined any of it. The engine was running. The memory of the red toolbox and the battered green truck was as clear as the night air pressing in around her. She got behind the wheel and sat for a minute, hands resting on the steering wheel, headlights shining out into the empty lot. The world felt a little less solid, the boundaries between what was possible and what wasn't blurred by what had just happened. She pulled back onto the road, watching the darkness gather in her rearview mirror, unsure if she felt comforted or unsettled by the kindness she'd received. All she knew was that being stranded changes you. It makes you pay attention to every sound, the wind, gravel underfoot, the engine's hum, and to every stranger who stops to help. And sometimes, the people who appear when you need them most have stories of their own, waiting to be uncovered on the next lonely road. Midnight cold, 1 bar, no data, dark woods pressing in. Ethan Miller slammed the hood of his car shut, his breath hanging in the air. He flexed his fingers, trying to get warmth back into them, and checked his phone out of habit. The screen glowed, empty of help. He looked down the deserted road, trees crowding the edge, branches tangled and bare. His car sat at an angle on the shoulder, headlights off, the world around him silent except for the wind moving through the woods. He kicked at the gravel and listened. At first he thought the movement in the trees was a trick of the light, just shadows shifting as the moon came out from behind a cloud. Then he heard it. Footsteps, slow and steady, crunching through the gravel. He straightened, heart thumping in his chest, and squinted into the darkness. A figure came into view, walking toward him with a steady pace. The woman's voice, when it reached him, was soft but clear. "Everything okay here?" He hesitated, the cold biting through his jacket. "Not really," he said. "Car broke down. Won't even turn over." She stepped into the moonlight, close enough for him to see her face. She looked about his age, maybe a little younger, with long dark hair tucked under the hood of a bright red sweatshirt. The color caught his eye right away, a sharp red against the gray and black of the woods and road. The hoodie seemed thin for the weather, but she didn't look cold. She nodded at the car. "Mind if I take a look?" He stepped aside, unsure but grateful for any help. "Sure. I don't know much about cars." She lifted the hood and leaned in, her movements confident, hands steady. "Happens to the best of us," she said, voice calm, almost familiar. She checked a few things, fingers moving along wires and belts like she'd done it 100 times before. "Timing belt's shot," she said after a minute, brushing her hands off on her jeans. "You're not going to fix that out here." He watched her, surprised at how certain she sounded. "You know cars?" She shrugged, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Used to help my dad with his truck. There's an old farmhouse about a mile up. White fence, porch light always on. They keep a tow truck. If you walk up, they'll help you out." He nodded, trying to process it all. "You came from that way?" She glanced back down the road. "Yeah, I walk these roads a lot." Before he could ask more, she started to turn away, her red hoodie fading into the shadows. He wanted to call after her, to ask if she needed a ride or if she was heading home, but the words stuck. Instead, he zipped his jacket and started walking in the direction she'd pointed. The road felt longer than a mile, the cold seeping into his legs as he kept his head down and counted the steps. The old farmhouse finally appeared around a bend, white fence catching the moonlight, porch light glowing above the door. He climbed the steps and knocked. After a moment, the door opened and a tall man in overalls stood there, blinking at him. "Sorry to bother you," Ethan said, rubbing his hands together. "My car broke down back there. A woman said you might have a tow truck." The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've got one in the barn. Where's your car?" Ethan gave him directions, then added, "She said it was the timing belt. She really seemed to know what she was talking about. Red hoodie, dark hair." The man's face changed, his eyes narrowing as he looked past Ethan into the dark. "You said a red hoodie?" Ethan nodded, the chill in his chest sharper now. "Yeah. She said she walks these roads a lot." The man stepped onto the porch, voice lower. "You sure about that? There's not many folks out walking here at night." "I'm sure. She was just here. Helped me figure out what was wrong." The man was quiet for a moment. "My daughter used to wear a red hoodie all the time. She was good with engines too. She died years ago, hit by a car at night, walking home from a friend's house. That was about 6 years ago, just down the road from where you broke down." The words sank in slowly, the porch light flickering above them. Ethan tried to find something to say, but nothing came out. He thought of the woman's steady hands, how she'd seemed so real, so certain. The man looked at him, not surprised. "You're not the first to say you've seen her. Folks get stuck out there and sometimes she helps." They walked to the barn in silence. The man hitched up the tow truck and drove Ethan back to his car. The engine was cold, the woods pressing in around them. The man worked quietly, hooking up the car and pulling it back toward the farmhouse. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, watching the road unwind behind them. When the car was parked safe in the yard, Ethan thanked him and stepped out. He glanced back down the road, half expecting to see a flash of red in the darkness. The man stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the night. Driving away later, Ethan kept his eyes on the rearview mirror. The road was empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, walking the shoulder, keeping watch. The red hoodie was burned into his memory, a bright spot in a night that felt colder the farther he drove. Stories like these don't always have answers. Sometimes the only thing left is the memory of a stranger's kindness and the quiet that follows after you're safe again. In the dark, when you're alone with your thoughts, it's easy to wonder about the comfort you find and what might be waiting just beyond the edge of the headlights. Frostbitten fingers, dead headlights, silence thicker than oil. Tyler Brooks sat in his car, staring at the faint outline of the road ahead. The engine had quit 10 minutes ago, and every second since had stretched out, the quiet pressing in until it felt like the world had shrunk to the size of the car's interior. He glanced at his phone. No bars. He dropped it on the passenger seat. The cold crept in through the glass, settling into his hands and jaw, and he tried not to think about how far he was from anyone or anything. He didn't want to waste the battery, so he left the headlights off. Outside, the trees leaned in over the road, their branches tangled against the sky. The only light came from the stars, scattered and weak, barely enough to make out the shape of the dashboard. It was the kind of darkness that made you feel like the last person left in the world. A sound broke through, the steady, deliberate crunch of footsteps on gravel. Tyler straightened, not sure if he'd imagined it. Another step, closer this time. He leaned forward, eyes straining against the dark. Then a pale, flickering glow appeared ahead, bobbing gently with each step. The light grew brighter, and an older man came into view walking down the center of the road. He wore a heavy coat, scuffed boots, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. In his right hand he carried an old lantern. Its flame threw a small, unsteady circle of light onto the gravel. "Evening," the man called, voice low but clear. Tyler hesitated, then opened the door and stepped out. His boots crunched on the road. The air stung his face, but the lantern's glow made the cold feel less sharp. The man stopped a few feet away, lantern held steady. "Car trouble?" the man asked, sounding like it was nothing unusual. Tyler nodded. "Yeah. Just died. No idea what happened." The man's eyes flicked to the car, then back to Tyler. "These roads have a way of doing that to people," he said, voice even. "Mind if I keep you company for a bit?" Tyler glanced at the empty road, then back at the man. He nodded. "Sure. I don't think anyone else is coming by tonight." The man motioned toward a large rock by the shoulder. Tyler followed, sitting down as the man leaned against it. The lantern rested on a patch of gravel, its light flickering between them. Tyler watched the flame, surprised by how steady it looked in the wind. "Name's Walter," the man said, offering a small smile. "They called me Lantern Walt decades ago, but that was another lifetime." "Tyler," he replied, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Walter settled in, his voice calm. "I used to walk these roads a lot. Worked nights for the county. You see all kinds out here. Families, truckers, teenagers thinking they're invincible. Most folks just want to get where they're going." The lantern's glow made the darkness seem farther away. Walter talked about long nights spent on these roads, the way the quiet could sneak up on you. He told stories about cars breaking down, about people grateful for a bit of company while they waited for a tow. His words were simple, but they filled the space between the trees and the sky, making Tyler feel less exposed. The wind picked up, rustling through the branches. Tyler pulled his jacket tighter. Walter's lantern didn't waver. The light stayed solid, a small anchor in the dark. Walter looked at Tyler. "Nights like this, you start to realize how much it matters to have someone nearby, even if you don't know them." Tyler nodded, not sure what to say. He stared at the lantern, the flame reflected in the glass. It felt like the only thing holding back the night. Walter kept talking, voice steady. He asked Tyler about his drive, where he was headed, what brought him out here. Tyler answered, the conversation easy. Walter never pushed, just listened. The stories drifted on, and Tyler found himself relaxing, the fear that had built up since the car died fading away. After a while, the sky started to lighten at the edges. The lantern's glow looked weaker in the grey dawn. Tyler turned to thank Walter for staying, but the man was gone. The rock was empty, the lantern missing. Only the road and the sound of the wind remained. A few minutes later, the rumble of a tow truck broke the quiet. Its headlights cut through the early morning haze. Tyler waved it down, relief making his hands shake. The driver hopped out, glanced at the car, then at Tyler. "You're lucky someone found you out here," the driver said, checking the engine. Tyler nodded. "There was an older man, Walter. He had a lantern. He kept me company." The driver paused, then looked at Tyler. "Walter? You mean Lantern Walt? He died in a wreck on this stretch in the 70s. People say he still keeps watch, making sure nobody's alone out here." Tyler stared at the driver, unsure what to say. The tow truck's idling engine sounded impossibly loud after the lantern's hush. He got in, glancing back at the road as they pulled away. The sun was up now, the shadows shrinking, but he kept looking for a flicker of light, half expecting to see Walter's lantern in the distance. Some stories don't end with answers. Sometimes, all you're left with is the memory of a stranger's kindness and the feeling that something unexplainable lingers just out of sight. On empty roads, comfort can arrive from the most unlikely places, sometimes from those who've been gone a long time. And while Tyler's night had started with nothing but cold and fear, it ended with a reminder that not every presence in the dark is something to run from. There are moments when help comes in unexpected forms, and the line between the living and the lost grows thin. For some, that line is crossed in a flash of headlights or the warmth of a lantern. For others, it's a voice in the night or the simple act of being seen. As Tyler's story fades into daylight, another waits to unfold, somewhere else along a lonely stretch of road. Lauren Hayes sat in her car, listening to the sound of frogs somewhere out in the mist. The road ahead was empty, the air thick and damp, and her headlights barely cut through the gray. She wore her bridesmaid's dress and heels, both feeling out of place now that the celebration was over and the world had gone quiet. She'd promised her friend she'd drive home safe after the wedding, but her car had given up miles back, leaving her stranded on Route 47 with no cell signal and no sign of help. She tried to keep calm, pacing along the gravel shoulder for a while, but the silence pressed in. The only light came from the dashboard, glowing softly against the dark. Lauren sat back down, gripping her phone even though she knew it wouldn't do her any good. The mist kept getting thicker, making the trees on either side of the road look like shadows moving just out of reach. Every so often, she thought she heard a car coming, but it was only the wind or the distant sound of water running through a ditch. Time moved slowly. She kept checking the clock, watching the minutes crawl by, feeling more exposed with each one. The dress itched against her skin, and her shoes pinched. But she was more aware of the isolation than anything else. It was the kind of night where every small sound seemed too loud, and every quiet moment felt like it would never end. When an engine finally broke the silence, Lauren's first reaction was relief. Headlights appeared behind her, moving slow, and she watched as a silver minivan pulled up to the shoulder. The van stopped a few feet behind her car, and she saw a woman behind the wheel, her face soft in the glow of the dashboard. The passenger was a man about the same age, his expression calm and open. The window rolled down. "You need some help?" the woman asked, her voice cutting through the night like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lauren hesitated, but the normalcy of the moment made it easy to answer. Yeah, my car died. I can't get a signal out here. The man leaned across the seat. We're headed toward town. There's a diner open late, just a few miles up. We can give you a ride if you want. Lauren looked past them into the back seat. 2 kids sat there, a boy who looked about 7 and a teenage girl with headphones around her neck. The boy watched her with wide eyes, curiosity written all over his face, while the girl gave a quick, polite smile before glancing away. The van's interior lights spilled over the family, making them look as ordinary as anyone she'd ever seen. She felt the tension leave her shoulders. Thank you, she said, stepping out and closing her car door behind her. She slid into the empty seat, careful not to catch her dress on the door frame. Inside, the van felt lived in. There were a couple of snack wrappers in the cup holder, and the faint smell of fast food lingered. The woman introduced herself as Jen, the man as Mark, and the kids as Evan and Sophie. Evan started talking right away, asking about the wedding and pointing out the confetti stuck to Lauren's dress. Sophie mostly listened, giving Lauren a few shy smiles as she leaned her head against the window. The drive was quiet at first, but the family's conversation filled the space. Jen talked about how easy it was to get stuck out on this road, especially at night. We got caught in a storm out here once, she said, glancing at Lauren in the rearview mirror. Swore we'd never drive it again, but here we are. Mark laughed, shaking his head. Guess we didn't learn. The kids giggled, and Lauren found herself relaxing a little more with every mile. They talked about the wedding, the music, and how late it had gotten. Evan asked questions about the cake and the dancing, while Mark told a story about getting lost on a family vacation. The rhythm of their voices made the van feel warm, almost like she'd known them for years. The normalcy was a relief after the long stretch of silence on the road. The diner came into view, its neon sign buzzing in the mist. The lights inside were bright, and Lauren could see a few people sitting at the counter. The minivan pulled up, and she thanked the family as she climbed out. Jen smiled and told her to stay safe, and the kids waved from the back seat. The van pulled away, taillights disappearing into the fog. Inside the diner, Lauren walked to the counter and waited. The woman behind it looked up, a woman in her 50s with a beehive hairdo, wiping down the coffee machine. Lauren explained what had happened. The car breaking down, the family in the minivan, the ride to the diner. The waitress stopped wiping and stared at Lauren. They didn't tell you their last name, did they? Lauren shook her head. Number Y? The woman's voice was quiet. That family died in a crash on Route 47 years ago, hit by a drunk driver 1 mile from here. I remember it. They were coming back from a church thing. Lauren tried to take it in. I just rode here with them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The waitress nodded, her face serious. You're not the first. Every so often someone comes in, says they got a ride from a family in a silver minivan. Always on nights like this, always when someone's stranded. Lauren sat at the counter for a while, not sure what to do with what she'd just heard. The sounds of the diner faded into the background. She replayed the ride in her mind, the kids laughing, the parents' quiet reassurance, the way the van felt safe when everything else felt uncertain. When the tow truck finally came, Lauren followed it back out to her car. The mist had thinned, but the road still felt empty. She kept thinking about the family, about the way kindness had found her in the middle of nowhere. The memory of their voices and the warmth of the van stayed with her, even as she watched the taillights disappear for the last time. Some stories don't leave you easily. Even after you're safe, the details keep resurfacing. The laughter, the headlights, the ordinary moments that suddenly don't feel ordinary at all. Lauren drove home with the sense that what happened to her was both impossible and true, and that the comfort she'd found on that road would never be simple to explain. These encounters linger, not just because of what happened, but because of how they make you question what's real, and how a simple act of kindness can change everything, even when it comes from a place you can't quite understand. Some stories stay with you because they refuse to settle into a single explanation. The tales from County Road 14, the dark stretch near Chicago, or the foggy bends of Route 47 all leave something behind. An image, a sound, a feeling that's hard to shake. What makes these encounters so persistent in memory isn't just the shock of the supernatural, but the way ordinary moments, waiting for a tow, climbing into a stranger's van, hearing footsteps in the dark, become the backdrop for something that doesn't fit. Timing is a thread that runs through each account. Madison, Ethan, Tyler, and Lauren all found themselves stranded at the exact moment when the world felt most empty. There's a pause in each story, where the character realizes just how alone they are. The silence on the road stretching out until it feels almost physical. Madison notices the last bit of daylight fading over the cornfields, her car silent except for the wind. Ethan stands by his useless car, the woods pressing in, every branch and shadow sharper because there's no one else around. Tyler sits with the cold biting at his hands, headlights dead, the black highway stretching out on either side. Lauren waits in her bridesmaid's dress, mist swirling around the car, the sound of frogs and the distant glow of her phone the only proof she isn't dreaming. The settings in these stories do a lot of the work. County Road 14 is just a line of cracked asphalt between endless fields, the kind of place where the world feels far away. The woods near Ethan's breakdown close in so tightly that every sound seems amplified. Tyler's stretch of highway is empty enough that the quiet feels heavy, the air colder with every minute that passes. On Route 47, Lauren's headlights barely reach the trees, the mist swallowing up the edges of the road until the van's arrival feels like a break in the gloom. These details stick because they're real. Places you can picture, sounds you've heard, feelings you know. They anchor the stories, making the strange events that follow feel possible, even when logic says otherwise. The survivors' reactions are what give these stories their staying power. Madison keeps replaying the way Bill worked on her engine, the calm in his voice, the red toolbox glinting under the hood. When she learns the truth at the gas station, she can't stop thinking about the last thing he said. Just pass it on, like I'd do for my daughter. Ethan walks the mile to the farmhouse, thinking about the woman in the red hoodie, her steady hands on the engine, her voice in the dark. He tells the farmer about her, not expecting the story he gets in return. Tyler remembers the warmth of Walter's lantern, the way it made the night feel smaller. Even after the tow truck arrives, he keeps looking for a flicker of light in the rearview mirror. Lauren sits at the diner counter, the laughter from the minivan still echoing in her mind, the smell of fast food and the sound of the kids' voices refusing to fade, even after she hears what happened to the family years ago. Each story turns on a moment of relief. Help arrives, and for a second, everything feels normal. Madison's car starts. Ethan finds a safe path. Tyler isn't alone. Lauren is offered a ride. But then comes the twist, the detail that won't fit. The helper is gone, or never should have been there in the first place. The relief turns to confusion, then to a kind of dread that lingers. The survivors don't claim to understand what happened. They don't offer answers. Instead, they describe the details, the way the lantern glowed, the toolbox felt solid, the van's interior was warm and ordinary. It's these specifics that make the stories believable. and it's the lack of explanation that keeps them alive long after the night is over. The ambiguity is what makes these stories so hard to forget. Are these encounters warnings, acts of kindness, or something else? Madison wonders if Bill is still looking out for stranded drivers because of a promise he made in life. Ethan thinks about the woman in the red hoodie and whether she chooses to help or is bound to the road by something she can't control. Tyler listens to the tow driver talk about Lantern Walt and tries to decide if it matters whether Walter was real or not. What matters is that he wasn't alone. Lauren's ride with the family in the minivan leaves her with more questions than answers. She can still picture the kids waving goodbye, the taillights fading into the mist. The lasting effect comes from the way these stories tap into basic fears and hopes. Everyone knows what it's like to feel alone, to need help, to hope that someone will show up when things go wrong. These stories give that hope a shape, sometimes familiar, sometimes impossible. They remind us that comfort can appear in the strangest forms, and that sometimes the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thinner than we think. There's also the way the stories force the survivors, and anyone who hears them, to question their own memories. Madison keeps looking for the green pickup in traffic, half expecting to see Bill at the next gas station. Ethan listens for footsteps on quiet roads, remembering the calm in the woman's voice. Tyler watches the dark for another lantern, and Lauren finds herself glancing at every silver minivan she passes. The events refuse to settle. They become something the survivors carry with them, shaping the way they see the world. Even if they never find answers, the experience changes them. The settings linger too. The long cornfields, the mist on the highway, the silent woods. These places become part of the story, a kind of memory map that anyone who's ever been stranded can recognize. The stories use these details to ground the supernatural in the everyday, making the impossible feel just close enough to touch. Maybe that's why these stories stay with us. It isn't just the fear or the mystery. It's the way they echo real moments, waiting in the dark, hoping for help, finding comfort where you least expect it. The survivors don't try to explain away what happened. They remember the details, the feelings, and the way the world seemed to shift for just a moment. And that's enough to keep the stories alive, passed on to anyone who's ever wondered what might be waiting on the next empty road. In the end, does kindness outlive death? Or is it something else entirely? When help appears on a deserted road, it can leave you with more questions than answers. Madison, Ethan, Tyler, and Lauren each left their encounters changed, forced to reconsider what they thought they knew about the world. Stranded and exposed, they received kindness from strangers who couldn't possibly exist, and that realization lingers long after the engine starts again. Let us know in the comments which story unsettled you most, or if you've ever experienced something you can't explain. Hit subscribe if you're intrigued by the thin line between kindness and the supernatural. And next time your car dies in the dark, you might welcome or fear the stranger who shows up. Sometimes the hand that helps carries its own secrets.